Oh, we're coming back into order. We convened at 5 o'clock, and we recessed, went into executive session, and we are now returning from that executive session where our discussion was on real estate. And we have no action items at this time to report. So we are now ready to go back into the board meeting. So, roll call. We have everybody here tonight. We have Tony Moore, Claire Wilson, Danny Peterson. I almost forgot his name. I did that the first meeting. Jeffrey McAnalloy, and I'm Carol Gregory, and I'm the president of the board. I'd like to now ask the Todd Beamer High School JROTC to present the colors. Would you please rise?
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order. Right. Face. Four. Go. Forward. Mark.
Thank you. The agenda for the meeting, if you did not receive a copy, is over on the table, and a motion is now in order to approve the agenda.
Madam President, I move that the Board of Education approve the meeting agenda of March 25th, 2014 as submitted.
Is there a second?
I second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. We're now moving to the consent agenda.
Madam President, I move that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda of March 25th, 2014 as submitted.
Is there a second?
I second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion to approve the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Okay, Vince, or Rob? Do you want to go to the, Vince Blauser, we're going to recognitions.
Wonderful, thank you. Good evening, President Gregory, members of the board, Superintendent New. This evening I'm proud to be able to highlight some student champions and winners that walk among us and invite you to celebrate in their accomplishments with me. So let me begin our celebration by calling to the podium Jasmine Pleasant. Jasmine, come on up. Oh yes. Wait till you hear. Jasmine, stand right here so the people on TV can see you, okay? Let me tell you about Jasmine. As a freshman this year at Thomas Jefferson High School, Jasmine won the State Girls Wrestling Championship at 112 pounds. In addition to winning the district championship, Jasmine is the first girl state and district champion for the Raiders. Let that sink in. Isn't that cool? She's an all-around athlete. Jasmine is currently competing in track at TJ. Please join me in congratulating Jasmine for her accomplishments. Jasmine. All right, wonderful. Are we gonna get pictures? We're gonna get pictures. Can I invite families, if they're in the audience, to come up and get pictures too?
Certainly.
Come on up, families. Please, right up in the middle there. We're going to put you on the
Thank you.
spot. Fantastic, Jasmine. Awesome. Congratulations, Jasmine. Next, I'd like to invite to the podium Arian Carpio. I don't know if I saw Arian here. Okay, there's that. Joni Hall, principal of Todd Beamer. I just need you to hear what Arian did this year. And Joni, you're going to stand in on her seat here. As a junior, Arian is now a two-time state champion wrestler for the Todd Beamer High School Titans. Bringing home the gold in 2013 and 14, she won all 4 matches at her 2014 state tournament by fall. I guess that's a call. In the 124-pound weight class. As a matter of fact, the championship match was her 100th career win at Todd Beamer High School. How fantastic is that? Quite an accomplishment. So would you, on our behalf, congratulate Arian?
I would love to congratulate Arian. I will make sure I
Fantastic.
give her all of the congratulations.
Thank you. Let's hear it for Arian if she's watching at home. Next to the podium, I'd like to invite Isaiah Diggs. Isaiah. Yay. All right, here's Isaiah. Isaiah Diggs is a junior Decatur Gator wrestler at 138 pounds. He's currently the 3A state champion with a stellar 38-3 record. Wow, let that sink in. Last season he placed 3rd at the 3A state. In addition, Isaiah has won 2A SPSL league titles and 2 regional titles. He anchors the Decatur wrestling team as they place 2nd. Congratulations, Mr. Bressler, Matt. In the state championship for the 2nd year in a row. Congratulations, Decatur, and to Isaiah Diggs for your accomplishments. Congratulations. Come on up, Coach. Great job, Isaiah. Next, I'd like to invite Thomas Anderson to the podium, please. Thomas. Here's Thomas's accolades. Thomas is a 10th grade student at Fedway High School and a member of the Eagles swim team. He set the state meet record this year in the 100-yard or 100-meter? 100-yard backstroke with a first place time of 48.10 seconds and qualified him for the high school All-American status. I know, that's awesome. He also took first place in the 50-yard freestyle with a time of 20.19 seconds. Thomas has his sights set on the Olympics as an Olympic contender, and I think you should get his autograph right now. Congratulations, Thomas. Come on up, family. Congratulations. Now I'd like to invite some champions on a different level. I'd like Joshua Coleman, Jaden Zwick, Jordan Cotton, and Marina Rojas to come to the stage. You might as well go stand up there already. I'm going to do so much going on. All right. Yes. These Fantastic Four individuals from Thomas Jefferson have been selected to receive the Act 6 Scholarship, full tuition, full need scholarship. These students were selected from 900 initial applicants during the 3-month process and were chosen for their leadership, academic potential, and commitment to serving their community. This is the kicker. The value of their combined scholarship for 4 years totals almost $750,000. Congratulations. How about that? Wonderful. Congratulations. Congratulations to all the recipients tonight. That's wonderful. Fantastic. That's all we have for student recognition. President Gregory, are you going to talk to the community, and then I will introduce? I've got one more. Oh, you want salad? Okay. Either way. And then I've got one more to come back to. And then I've got one more to come back to.
Do I have a script?
I don't have it.
I believe that I have the great opportunity this evening to recognize a group of dedicated community members and parents who collectively call themselves Citizens for Federal Way Schools. And this group of volunteers consistently finds ways to help our community understand the various ballot propositions we put in front of them, and more importantly, helps engage our community in actually indicating yes on their ballot. And so we have at least one member of Citizens for Federal Way Schools here with us this evening, although I believe President Gregory wanted to recognize a host of the busy Friday morning bunch. And I have now 2 members. Yay. See, if we were doing this at 7 o'clock in the morning, you'd have everybody there. So we have Kelly Tanner as the Vice President of Citizens for Federal Way Schools. I think move on up to Rob and Carol. We have parent advocate Angela Wooster, who's been advocating for us. Jason Brown in his role of support for the recent EP&O levy. And a couple of people who I don't believe are here tonight are Chris Milholland, the president of Citizens for Federal Way Schools, and Amy Bronson Doherty. But again, my sincere thanks, and I know President Gregory and Superintendent New can do a much more eloquent job, but I just wanted to say thank you also for your time and dedication to the students of Federal Way. It's very nice to be here tonight saying thank you and not talking about backup strategies.
Okay, I have one more. Recently, the Federal Way Public Schools was a recipient of 2 awards given out by the Roadmap Awards program. We received one for building a system of authentic parent engagement, and one for creating opportunity for accelerated academics and removing barriers to college. And I've invited Dave Davis and Therese Moore to come to the podium and just give us a brief reflection of that award ceremony. Dave, want to start with you?
He wasn't there.
And Diana Graden.
This is Diana Graden. This award represents a 4 to 5 year process of giving kids the opportunity to not only take advanced classes through academic acceleration, but also the college readiness assessments, the PSAT, the 8th grade ready step, and the SAT. And so in 2 weeks, for the first time ever, we'll be doing a school day assessment of the SAT for juniors. So it's come full circle, and it's the qualifying project 7 for Race to the Top. This award right here. Her hard work and leadership and helping facilitate the logistics, as well as our relationship with the College Board and Nancy Potter. And I want to thank the school board for continued support of this before it ever became a Race to the Top or before it ever became part of the Roadmap project. So thank you for the endeavor of breaking down barriers for kids. So.
Thank you.
And Therese Moore.
Really quickly, I want to give my team, some staff and parent members and kids an opportunity to come up with me as for 1 minute, share that our district's Family and Community Partnership Office received the top acknowledgement. We were a finalist, and then the night of March 4th, we found out that they decided that we should be more than a finalist, but we should be the category winner in the area of, as he mentioned, building a system of authentic family engagement. Because we do not have a lone department director working solo to implement strategies and practices to engage families. Instead, our district has implemented an approach that supports families, staff, students, and parents working together as informed, prepared, and involved partners in the shared responsibility of promoting student success. More specifically, we have a department that collaboratively develops research-based tools and supports that focus on helping families support their student success at home and at school. Tonight, our team would like to thank the Federal Way Public School staff and leaders of the district for believing in the value of family engagement, believing in our team, believing in our families, our students, and the work of this department. Finally, I would like to present each of you with a copy of the letter we received from Congressman Adam Smith, who went out of his way to acknowledge both award programs and has asked about our Parent Leadership Institute and our department's family and community engagement efforts. So I'm planning to call Congressman Smith and let him know that we'd love to talk to him about our family engagement work. So I'm going to ask Edgar to show you it's too heavy for me to hold, but to show you the award, and then I'll see if Sierra can hand each of you your copy of the Congressman's letter of appreciation and acknowledgement. We like to keep our kids informed, prepared, and involved, too. Thank you. Oh, okay.
Can you introduce folks?
Okay. I'll ask each person if it's okay to come to the mic and introduce themselves quickly.
Lydia Asafa Dawson. Greta Holtz.
Thank you.
Ria Dull. Patty Samara.
Emma Scott. Elizabeth Bagnell.
Rosa Peña.
Maria Figueroa.
Desiree Figueroa.
Edgar Kaler.
Let's all get in your big group photo. Get friendly.
think this is another example of the quality of work that's going on in the Federal Way School District, and it's exciting to have the opportunity for people to see who actually does that work. And thank you all for coming. I also want to mention that there were several other people who also supported the Citizens for Federal Way levy effort. And these are people who couldn't do it on their work time, but got up at 7 in the morning to come to the Friday meetings. And I see some of them in the room. I see Ron Mayberry. I see Sally is someplace. Sally was there. Who else was there? Rob was there. I appointed myself. I don't know why for a Friday morning meeting. But Mark Davison was also very active, and they gave above and beyond. They didn't come as school employees. They came as citizens of the community and committed to the education of their neighbors. So I want to thank them as well. Vince, are you next?
Rob is going to start me off.
Oh, Rob, are you?
I am. Good evening, members of the board and members of the audience. Mr. Blauser, thank you for what you're about to do, and that is to make the recommendation to the Board of Education, our next principal at Thomas Jefferson High School. For people who don't know, Principal Liz Drake has announced her retirement, and we have gone through an internal process and now have a recommendation to present to you Adrian Chacon as the next principal. So if Adrian can join Vince at the podium, and then Vince, could you please introduce Adrian?
Thank you. Thank you. Allow Adrian the opportunity to come up so put a name to a face. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce to you Adrian for your approval for the next principal at Thomas Jefferson High School. I'd like to start with a little background information on Adrian. She started her teaching career as a substitute teacher in the North Shore School District in 1995, then moved to the Bethel School District in 1998 as an activities coordinator and physical education teacher. In 2001, she moved to Skyview Junior High and taught social studies, English, leadership, and PE. Wow, yes, a lot, yeah. After 10 years in that capacity, Adrian transitioned to Thomas Jefferson High School in 2011 as an assistant principal and as supervisor of the IB diploma program, the academic acceleration program, and as the middle school transition coordinator. In addition to a multitude of academic leadership skills, Adrian is fluent in Spanish and has worked hard to connect with the Latino community in the TJ area. Her credibility among her staff and community as an educational leader has been proven in her tenure as the assistant principal at Thomas Jefferson. Students, parents, and staff involved in the conversation of recommending Adrian all agreed that her knowledge of the current programs at Thomas Jefferson, knowledge of the areas of need, and her connection to staff and school community makes her our choice to lead Thomas Jefferson High School. I am excited to introduce to you Adrian Chacon, and we all should look forward to her continued leadership at Thomas Jefferson. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Vince and Adrian. Why don't we do our motion, and then we'll ask you to speak? Okay.
So, Madam President, I move the Board of Education approve the appointment of Adrian Chacon as principal of Thomas Jefferson High School effective July 1st, 2014.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Welcome, Adrian.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I just want to say thank you so much for your support in this, and to all the TJ students and families that are here as well. I look forward to continued great things at TJ. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
And since Liz is in the audience tonight, I'd just like to take a moment to thank Liz for her time at Todd Beamer and at Thomas Jefferson, her leadership and her loyalty to our students, staff, all of us. We really appreciate all that you've given and all the time and efforts and the impacts you've had on our children. Thank you.
Okay, now we're moving to an update on the Truman Project. Ron Mayberry.
Good evening, President Gregory, Vice President McAnally, Superintendent New, members of our leadership team, and also in the audience we have some our teachers from our Truman Current Career Academy program, many of which I worked with back in 2009 when we started the program. So I welcome them and their passion for this work. Tonight, my goal is to spend a little time with blended learning and a little bit of information over the last couple of weeks with our Truman program. I bring this definition back to you. It's one I used 2 weeks ago. Blended learning is a formal education program in which a student learns at least in part through online delivery of content, instruction with some element of student control over time, place, path, or pace. And again, kind of emphasizing that last part, the control over time, place, path, and pace. It's an important element in blended learning. So with that, blended learning is really an opportunity. It's about student opportunity and personalization. Over the last year and a half, I've had the privilege of visiting multiple blended learning schools. And while each has been very different in their instructional delivery, there has been an embedded theme in each of these models. That is, each of these models all support personalization, student personalization, the learning by empowering students with control over time, place, path, and pace. I selected the following, excuse me, I skipped the page. That's fine. I selected the following from Tom Vander Ark's book, Getting Smart. And this is a book that we had the opportunity to read, Rob and I, a couple years ago when it was published in 2012. And it has some really great guidance on where Tom Vander Ark believes learning is going through the digital age. So while he does use the term blended learning and other terms, some of the chapters I just chose to put in this slide was American Education, New Students in an Old System, Customization, Building the Right Playlist for Each Student. Think personalization in that chapter. Motivation, Getting Everyone in the Learning Game. And Equalization, Connecting All Students to Excellence. There are other chapters, and I encourage you to read this, and so doing so, I am going to purchase a copy for each of you on the board, and I'll try to get to that to you soon. It's a great, quick read from a local leader in this area. So blended learning tools, ST Math, Dreambox, these are 2 math tools, some of which are in active use in 2 of our schools right now, Mark Twain and Wildwood. And we're expanding that because we have 6 schools that are involved in Race to the Top. And so we'll have the opportunity to expand that into 4 additional schools. The key part about both these math tools is it personalizes student learning so that the adaptive software is very powerful and it adapts to the students' learning as they progress through the content. So it's not a matter of a teacher placing them at 6th grade or 4th grade or whatever. It's about them getting into the math software and the software placing them based on their needs and their skills. So the other cool part about these type of tools is it gives a great deal of data to our teachers. And teachers then can personalize offline or in the non-digital manner by grouping kids together that have similar needs. All right, so if say there's 30 kids in the class, they're all in ST Math, and the teacher, through looking through that data, notices that 4 of them need a particular emphasis on a particular math skill. She or he is able to pull them together while the kids continue working in the ST Math program. Dreambox works very similar. Myon Reader is another program, but as the term may imply, it's a reading software. And The thing that's really empowering on this tool, along with, again, a lot of personalization, is students are given recommendations for their reading based on a quick survey they take about their interest. And that software, much like Amazon software does, it adjusts to the personalization of that student. So it learns based on what they're reading. So it starts them out based on their survey, but then it adapts to the actual books they read and select. Teachers can see how much time they're spending, their Lexile reading levels, and other important data points, again, to help personalize that and help teachers differentiate to smaller groups of kids and pull those groups together to have those kind of conversations. So this coming fall, we're looking at two options. Actually three if we mention Internet Academy, but there are two options happening at the Truman campus. We have Career Academy, which I helped start in 2009, and that has a evolving change. It's been changing over the years from the very get-go when I started with the initial 8 teachers that I hired. And Life Prep Flex is a new option that's coming. It's a fully blended model. It will bring many extra opportunities for students to close the gap, both in credits and skills, and also have opportunities for taking courses they previously have not been able to take due to the size and scale of the current program. This is a slide that I used in meeting with students when Vince Blauser and myself and Principal Adam Kulas last Wednesday met with freshmen and a few sophomores. On Thursday, I met with some additional students, and Adam Kulas is continuing to meet with the remaining students, including yesterday and today. So with blended learning, a new term I learned the other day on the radio, and I just thought it fits so well here. Instead of the old term outsourcing, which is just such a hurtful thing, because it is really about sending jobs away from either a country or a company within, insourcing. So Internet Academy is a school in our district. It's been there since 1996. And so with insourcing, the actual definition I pulled off of Google is the practice of using an organization's own personnel or other resources to accomplish a task. So here are several ways blended learning insourced to Internet Academy will benefit all of the future Career Academy and Life Prep students. So again, two options. Both those groups will have access to previously inaccessible courses such as advanced placement, world languages, wider selection of CTE, additional electives, and additional fine arts. I mentioned the student meetings. So this is some really rough data I took on my own notes. Adam is compiling some additional data, and I'm looking forward to seeing after he's completed all his conversations. But initially on, we had 20 students who indicated Life Prep Flex would be the option they would choose of the two options being offered in the fall. 11 students indicated they would want to stick with the new Career Academy blended learning model. So we're still planning on blended learning being part of that model, but in those cases they will have language arts, social studies, and math delivered face-to-face still. So other things like if they're taking an AP course, if they're taking a world language course, those will be delivered still in a blended model. 6 students indicated going to Skill Center to pursue those deeper CTE programs. And they would couple up with either Life Prep or Career Academy. And it varied, 50-50, I'd say. 8 are planning to invest in starting with a Running Start program of some sort. And that amounted to students talking about taking one class, kind of dipping their toe into that world, or a full-time go. In all cases, they too talked about a mixture of either Life Prep or Career Academy. So currently we have 110 students, 12 teachers. 52 of those 110 students have 16 or more credits, so they're on the verge of graduating based on the 20 credit waiver we have currently in place. So as you can see, there's always a changeover of students there and because, again, scale, small size. I wanted to mention there have been one parent meeting that's taken place so far. In addition, we have meetings scheduled for April 2nd, April 16th, and an open invitation to come by and talk to Mr. Koulas directly based on schedule. And that's been shared in various manners. We shared it with the students I met with. Highly encouraging, lots of communication there with parents if they're open to that. Next steps. Going to continue meeting with underclassmen. Mr. Koulas hopes to complete that task in the next day or two. It's a fairly time-consuming task, sitting and talking for 10 or 15 minutes. Even with 100 students, it adds up. He's designing plans for those 51 students that are getting close, because their plan may need to be personalized a little different, because they have a target this summer or this spring of finishing up. He's met with secondary assistant principals and met with secondary principals to tell them about the new option that's available, along with the Career Academy option. And he plans to make visitations to our 2 K-8 schools, our middle schools, and high schools. I believe he's made a visitation to Sacagawea yesterday. And then in closing, I wanted to share a quote from a 2013 graduate. This particular quote came from a student who has been very vocal and negative towards the proposed changes and the pilots we're talking about. He recently met with Principal Koulas on the weekend, had a cup of coffee, discussed the program. He's grown into a really great young man, has had some new opportunities that have been provided through the current Career Academy program, through JAG, which Lori Beavers worked with him on, and others. So he's very passionate about what those teachers have brought to his, the opportunities that teachers brought. But this quote shows how even he is considering how this might help. And I'm going to read this, so bear with me. I had the chance to get Mr. Koulas to explain the entire new system to me. And much to my chagrin, because he was taking some shots at it, I agree with Don on this. The new system is taking Truman forward in a direction that it needs to go. The system will allow students who need to go faster, and to allow those who need things explained to them to get the questions answered. This change needs to happen, if only because it's going to allow Truman to flourish instead of diminish. So he sees it as an expanded opportunity the blended learning will bring to them. Is there any questions from the board?
Questions?
I just, I understand blended learning. I understand alternative ways of looking. I understand individualization and differentiation, and I understand student focus. But I think and I want kids always to be at the center, so the student focus is critically important. Mm-hmm. But what I can't quite figure out is when we make a change, we're beginning with an end in mind. And I may not have been here or been part of conversations, but I'm curious about being able to talk a little bit about why the change. So, blended learning and individualization, but is it also, are there conversations around it's because we want to add options? Is it because we want to increase quality instruction? Because we want to, because what it feels like is, although for the right reason, the change has come, but those that maybe could be part of the process are now having a change reported to them as opposed to being part of the change. And not everybody will agree with the direction that we're going. But I think this is the process piece that I think that's so important as we think about new models and new ways of doing things, that we don't, students in the center, always, student-centered. But there's my wonder is, this was the first time last time we heard about it. So it leaves me with that whole visible and visual way that we process and kind of plan forward.
So there's two pieces to what I heard you just say that I'd like to speak to. First of all, process. And it's something that we've been talking a lot about throughout this past year. We've got to get better at it. We've got to get better at engaging our community in conversations, in particular our students, and having them involved in these conversations and getting their input and talking about what they see for themselves, what they see their futures like, and how they best learn. The second piece is yes to all your questions about all the things that go into this consideration as we look to a blend model. And in our research, this is a proven strategy. It's a proven and effective pedagogy. Student individualization. Boy, that individualization.
Or personalization.
That was a little bit better. I was going to go to personalization next. But personalizing learning based on each student's needs and their areas of interest, but also the teacher, it's going to be a change in teaching strategy. They're going to be more of a facilitator. But in the classrooms that we visited, we see that in action, and it's powerful. It's powerful. And we had a chance to visit classrooms in Detroit where you're going through neighborhoods of unbelievable blight, broken windows, boarded up houses, burnt out houses, and then you go into these schools and these beautiful children who are engaged and the learning is alive in these bastions of hope of their public schools. It was an unbelievable experience. And so the last piece to this, now I'm going to add a third piece now, is that there is a choice going on. So the change that is being proposed now or is being implemented at Truman is not a change that's going to be implemented upon anyone. That the students are going to have the chance to choice in. And I think that's a really important piece. If we could rewind the tape, rewind the clock, we would have engaged them on the front end. And that's the learning piece from our end.
And I would say not only students and teachers, but to hear this the first time, it's very difficult the last time to respond in a way and maintain a positive support when you want to be able to have asked the questions before the presentation comes. And I think it's also important as we go through a change process to understand how we work with staff to either help them understand what the change is and then how to either work within that or perhaps make some other decisions so that, again, they can be perhaps part of that change. And it is very difficult, and I understand that. And I also know we need to provide many options and we need to individualize. And I also hear you say it's not either or. It is and both. So options won't go away, but I just want to again put out the process piece is critical before it ever happens.
And if I may, again, I just want to add a couple thoughts. First of all, noted, and that is a focus of our work moving forward as we engage the community in these conversations. And again, I emphasize student-centered, student first. The second piece is, as a father of 2 full-time Internet Academy students, and I looked at what you had up on your presentation tonight, Mr. Mayberry, and I'm just, I'm reminded of how much the world around us has changed. And I always hold up these. And, these weren't around when we were kids. These were Star Trek things. and the work world, the globalization that we're living in, and the system of education that we're required to administer isn't necessarily aligned with the society that we live in. And we've got to get adjusted to what's happening through technology. And so I think the 3 things that we've got to do a better job of, we've got to engage our parents, we've got to personalize the learning, and we have to use technology as accelerator. It's here. It's not, I think I heard you say something in Tom Vander Ark's book. It wasn't that the way that he thinks it's supposed to go, but it's the way that he sees it going.
Happening.
Yeah, it's occurring. It's occurring. So it's a shift that we need to embrace, but we need to embrace it strategically. We need to embrace it at a pace that we can adjust to, that our teachers are comfortable with, and that our students can help us lead because they're more comfortable in the technological environment than we are.
So 2 weeks ago, I asked several questions. And Carol and I actually took a visit to Truman. And part of what we heard in our campaign is that the community is upset with us because we're not transparent and we don't communicate. So Carol and I continue to push that button at every opportunity we can. And this is one that we have again said that we've not communicated well. And the last portion, in one of the pieces that we had in the conversation, I can tell you that I was really concerned when last time that it was presented that it was really a replacement or a feeling of replacement, and we walked in last week with Adam, and the slide that was shared is that it's an either-or choice. So that took care of part of my concern. The other concern is what's going on with the teaching staff and the educators that are there. And we've been assured again that that is something that is going to be taken care of and that you'll have input into. Again, in that learning process, we need to make sure that we engage them at the forefront and not on the back end. And that's something, again, that we will continue to do to make sure that everybody is a part, because it impacts everybody. It impacts everybody's lives. I am totally with you that students center always. But these teachers give their lives and their hearts to us, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of them as well. And so we've been assured again that everybody will be taken care of. So I hope that it'll be sooner than later that we'll look at those decisions on those teachers and where there's displacement and buy in with that. And I've been reassured that it is, and I trust that it will. So I know there are some staff in the audience tonight. So again, we're aware of it, but I trust the administration that we're going to take care of you. And again, we continue to talk about the transparency and all of us being knowing before it's presented here as well. So it's a partnership, and I believe that the partnership will happen and we'll all work together. It's just pieces that we have to work on to make sure that we get the bricks where we need them to be so that we're all comfortable.
I would just add to that I concur with both what Claire and Jeffrey said. And one of the things, and Ron and Rob and all of us have talked about, and that is a planning process needs to utilize all the expertise that we have. And it really felt like those who were living this and implementing the program that we were talking about weren't engaged. And we've all talked about how that's got to change. And so it's more than just being taken care of, I think, although I understand directly what Jeffrey's. It's about respecting people's expertise and their excitement and enthusiasm for change as well. So hopefully that's where we're headed. I think we're all in agreement that, you know, you make some mistakes, you move on, and you learn from them, and that's what we're into now. So we really appreciate all of you that are concerned about this issue and hope that you'll continue to communicate with us so that we can learn. And as Claire says, it is about the process, and so we all have to learn. You know, we're all lifelong learners, and we're proving it. Anything further on Truman?
Thanks for the update, Mr. Mayberry.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Sorry? Speaking of technology, if anyone wants to speak to the board, there are blue sheets on the table, and if you could fill one of those out, please. Since no one has yet, I'm going to assume no one wants to speak. If, however, we find out that there is someone who didn't know the process for this, we'll figure out a way to give you that opportunity. So moving on, superintendent comments.
Thank you, Madam President, and again, members of the audience tonight. Just want to start off with acknowledging one more of those Breakfast Club participants that worked on the levy, and that was our quiet participant, Deb Stenberg, who's in the audience tonight. That's okay. I received a text saying that.
I'm sorry.
And again, that's okay. And you know what? It's typical of Deb because she's so quiet behind the scenes and does such a great job for us in all aspects. So thank you, Deb. I just wanted to thank Vince Blauser for your recognitions tonight. I think either you've been to Toastmasters or you want to be a ESPN sports announcer of some sort. Great job. What a great way to start a meeting. And all of our athletic and academic accolades that our students accomplish. It's just, it's such a great way to start a meeting. It's so fun to shake their hands and see the look in their eyes and to hear the things that they have accomplished at their young ages is just amazing. And the $750,000 to those 4 kids for the Act 6 scholars, incredible. I just want to add, and we'll have the TJ math team here in the near future, but I did receive an email from Tom Norris that once again, TJ's math team is state champions. They continue their excellence. Is Liz still here? Yes, and I just, I'm so pleased that Adrian Chacon has been approved as the next principal at TJ. Whenever there's a change in leadership, especially the effective leadership that you've provided at that school, the transition is of concern, but not with Adrian stepping in. And so I want to thank you, Liz, for stepping in, 3 years ago now, to a very delicate and very anxious situation, calming it immediately, and moving TJ forward at an incredible speed. Your leadership has been exemplary. It's appreciated, and your succession is also appreciated. So thank you and congratulations to Adrian. I also want to congratulate Treese Moore and Dave Davis and Diana Gradden and all the folks that were here tonight for the awards that were bestowed upon the district, as they were our representatives for our work in family engagement and academic rigor. And what's really nice is that through the Roadmap Project and, of course, our Race to the Top grant that we were awarded from the federal government that will probably not be funded anymore because the legislature failed to support the work. That was kind of an angry, hostile moment that I just shared with the audience. That we were a major reason why we received that federal Race to the Top grant. And I just want to congratulate you guys, Treese and Dave and Diana, for your work in leading those particular areas that you've led so well over the last few years, and to receive those the inaugural awards at the Museum of Flight 2 weeks ago. Congratulations to all of us in the district, but to you in particular for your leadership with that work. And then we also received information from OSPI that our Taft Academy is one of only four schools recognized statewide this year for Innovation Award. And the recipients are selected based on a level of creativity and experimentation, incorporation of best practices in research, increase in student achievement and/or closing the achievement gaps, collaboration with parents in the community, and high staff morale and engagement. So we will have Paul Teitler and representatives from Taft Academy here in our April meeting, and congratulations to Taft on that outstanding award. And I want to close with, it's hard to believe, but we just had our second We Day Seattle. And I've got to tell you, I wasn't planning on going this year, and I really don't know why. But then when the invitation came and the excitement kind of kicked in again, there was quite a contingent of adults there, but there were 600 of our students there. And throughout the evening before at a dinner event and the We Day event itself, Federal Way was consistently recognized for the work that they've done in partnering with Free the Children, with the Seattle Seahawks, and the work that our students have done in community service, both locally and globally. And in particular, we had some students on the stage, in front of 15,000 people at Key Arena. And I know I'm going to mess up this first name, and I didn't ask for the pronunciation, but Jape Sifu, am I close? From Woodmont, did an outstanding presentation on stage, and the Dawson brothers, Caleb and Joshua Dawson, did a joint presentation and talked about their mother Lydia, who is here tonight with the Family Engagement Group. So it was just a proud moment once again all day at Key Arena, and to see the Federal Way students, the work that they've done to earn their way in to We Day, and to be a part of such a fantastic regional event. Thank you.
Sorry, any questions? Okay, school board comments. Do you want to start, Tony?
I have nothing this evening.
Okay. Claire?
I was at We Day, and I will tell you, I rode the pumper bus that left Todd Beamer at 6:00 a.m. with a bus full of students that came from all over, who job it was to excite other students and get them ready. And they were an incredible group of hosts on that bus, and certainly directed traffic and pumped people and started the wave. And as Superintendent New said, really were in every facet of the We Day celebration, from on stage to behind the scenes to the volunteer work that happened. I will tell you, along with Caleb and Josh, they were on the stage with other powerful people. So Martin Luther King III was on stage with them. Flo Rida, if you know who Flo Rida is. If you don't, you need to check that out. Flo Rida was on stage. Cody Simpson, if you don't know who that is, you need to check Cody Simpson out. And the 12th Man was in the house, as well as the Sounders, and the Lombardi Trophy was in the house as well. So Pete Carroll and a number of the Hawks were there and talked about, not about their tributes on the field, but how they got to where they are. And not one of those people on stage who we know by name talked about how come they were there by their name. What they talked about is what it took for them to get there, and that they didn't know they were going to be where they were. It was the work that brought them. And it's always exciting. And the drive home, people didn't sleep. They kept on talking about what their next big thing was. I want to, again, personally thank the work of the Federal Way School District around meaningful family engagement. And I know it's a conversation that's been had over a lot of years, and people not really understanding that we, in fact, are a leader not only in our region, but in the state and across the nation, and the valuable work that we're doing. And it's not about activities and events. It's about how you engage families in their child's education and understanding that they are their child's first teacher, and they will always be their child's advocate. And we expect that, and we want that for every parent. And so I just want to thank those folks on the ground that have been doing the work. And there are many people looking to see how they may replicate what's been done here, because it is impactful and it is effective for all families. And then the last thing I want to say is tonight we're all missing the Taft Academy second annual Academy Awards Film Festival. And one of their exhibitions, this is their third exhibition of the year, and it's entitled What's Your Issue? And word on the street is that Marie Verhaar is in one of those films tonight that's talking about the grading system here in Federal Way. One of the students who I know closely has created a film about what it means to average and what it means not to average. But the exciting part about that exhibition is the top winners of the film festival will have a public viewing at the Starplex Theaters over by the Commons on April 1st. So if you are so inclined to see what project-based learning looks like and what outcomes look like and rigor and depth of a subject, I would invite you to get a hold of Taft Academy office and let them know you're interested in the public viewing of their Academy Award winners. And they would love to have you in the audience to see that. Thank you.
Danny?
I had several things to say, but I actually, Superintendent New covered it. I had a list, and I just started checking off, like, okay, I don't need to mention that. The one thing I do want to mention tonight is Dom Cooks over at Decatur High School. He's being nominated for the 2014 National Guard USA Today High School Sports Inspirational Athlete of the Year. And voting is up for that right now, and I just encourage people to get on there and vote for him. It's pretty awesome to have that consideration. And so that's all I have to share tonight, so thank you.
So I continue to do my work going into schools. I, in the last couple of weeks, have been to Mark Twain in Wildwood. I actually spent 6 hours at Wildwood a week ago on 2 different days. And the work that both of those schools are doing is pretty phenomenal. ST Math is something that we can't get out quick enough, and I totally support it and believe that we need to do everything we can to fund that at as many of our 23 schools as we can as quickly as possible. And the work that's being done at Wildwood, you know, when you watch 42 kindergartners come in and the work that they do and how they went directly to their desk, I don't know how those 2 teachers and that student teacher are managing them, but it was pretty phenomenal in the work that can be done and how they're doing things and managing that based on space constraints that we have. But I will continue that work. I've shared that I'll do that and focus on the 5 schools. I've hit 4 or 5 in my area, but I will also do the feeder schools around. And then any other invitations I have, will also do that. But I think it's important for us to be in the schools, in the trenches, seeing what's going on and the phenomenal work that's happening day in and day out. So thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to mention a visit that I took to Sunnycrest Elementary. I see an ELL teacher back there. And it really is phenomenal to see not only the impressive work that's going on, but the number of issues that schools address on a continuous basis. And also added to that, of course, are the high expectations we place on them. And often we find that people who make rules about education, the further away they are from the classroom, the more rigid their rules are and the more unrealistic. And when you look at some of the opportunities and issues at a school like Sunnycrest, where not only is it a dual language school that is just amazing, but they now have, I think it's up to, and somebody can correct me, but 50 immigrant students from other parts of the world, many of whom have not been had any formal education, have arrived this year. Think about what that means when we quickly look at, oh, well, test scores should be X, Y, or Z. I mean, it's an unrealistic world that we place schools in, and we just continuously have to figure out how to be supportive and how to make that happen. The work going on is phenomenal, and watching those kids come to school, they're so excited. And it just makes you realize not only the importance of the school environment for that child, but the obligations that not only are we trying to meet, but which are being imposed constantly to change the process. And it worries me that how do you get ahead of the game? And I'm not sure, but I can tell you, go visit a school here and you'll just see some phenomenal work. And I think it's also interesting to think about why we make decisions. One of the things that I find fascinating about dual language schools, which I started reading a book today that I was given, was the impact that dual language has on ELL students and the comparison of that strategy versus others. And I think whenever we look at academic achievement, which is what we are all about, what does the research tell us and how are we utilizing that research in making our decisions? And I think this is a great opportunity to delve into that a little more. So anyway, thank you so much for letting me come to Sunnycrest. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Legislative update. They went home.
Excuse me. I'm going to defer the budget information to Sally, but we have been talking about early learning, and the request for application came out from the state last week for an expansion of what will soon be our statewide pre-K program, which allows an opportunity for children who are in state-funded care to receive up to 6 hours a day of classroom time and instruction that's developmentally appropriate in a preschool setting, all the way up to 10 hours a day. And what's happening is at the state level, they are braiding funding for Working Connections childcare and are doing some systems work and alignment work at the state level so that providers don't have to collect dollars from families, which is what causes oftentimes businesses to go under, because if you don't have a steady income and you have families that are impacted by the economics and by work, then you can't maintain a class. And we also know that duration and amount of time students spend in school, young people spend in school, as well as the length of the school year is important. And if we are in fact going to change our opportunity gap statistics in our K-12 settings, we need to think about where children are and how we support quality environments. So I know that Federal Way School District is applying for some additional slots under the umbrella of Puget Sound DSD, and but it is a competitive process, and it's based not only on need and economics, saturation of where high needs families live and where we have low SES populations and a lot of diversity as well as where there are state-funded full-day K, which is an issue because we also will talk about lower class size, which means this will continue to be an issue of facilities and space, but there are opportunities we need to be creative about and figure out how it is we can serve more of our kids before they enter kindergarten, and we now have that opportunity. So, Sally, I'm going to let you deal with K-12. Thank you.
And may I add to the legislative report? I just forwarded to the members of the board an article from Education Week on the status of the waiver from No Child Left Behind as granted by Arnie Duncan and the U.S. Department of Education. Because and I referenced this briefly a moment ago, because our legislature here in Washington State during the last short session did not pass the required student growth component in the teacher evaluation required by the feds, we've lost our state waiver from No Child Left Behind. It also has an impact on our Race to the Top grant. And so nobody knows what the outcome of this is going to be, but when you read this article, I really recommend that you do. It's fascinating because basically you finish the article realizing that nobody really knows what to do. And essentially, we are now going to be returned to the No Child Left Behind performance requirements. And this is 2014, where we were all supposed to be throughout the entire country 100%, and nobody is. And so now all these punishments are supposed to kick in. So will they kick in, or will they hold off for a year to let them kick in, or will they even kick in at all? And furthermore, they really don't know how to assess our student performance, how to tie it to teacher evaluations. And when you walk away from the article just going, wow, we struggle here, and we're going to talk about E2 tonight, we struggle here about how to really measure our performance. And when you read the article, you realize that that conversation is alive and well all throughout the entire country. And when you apply that to what's happening globally, it's really it's a very difficult but very enriching conversation. So I recommend the article, and stay tuned because there will be impact as a result of this last legislative session on our state waiver for No Child Left Behind and our Race to the Top grant.
Jeffrey keeps my mic on. We're now moving on to assurance of organizational performance, and we've got several items that Sally McLean is going to lead us through. Do we need to begin with the motion out of the executive session? So this related to real estate.
So, Madam President, I move that we allow Sally to move forward with what was discussed in Amendment 4.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion? Seeing none.
Is the motion clear?
Madam President, if I could.
Do it again.
I don't.
If I could
I know it's
add
been
to
seconded. I don't understand.
Yeah, if I could,
Okay.
if
What
I
was
could
just-
clarify
Okay.
the motion, I move to extend the purchase and sale agreement with DevCo within the parameters established during our executive session. That information, where we would proceed forward from there, is what we're giving authorization for our superintendent to proceed.
Is that clear?
Do we want to allow this motion to fail and then restate that motion, or modify this motion, the
I'm
current
just
motion?
going to take
So-
that motion as the
Well-
motion.
Does the motion have a second?
Well, we just
Oh, okay.
seconded the first motion,
Okay.
so that's
Okay.
what I'm getting at. So,
Okay.
for clarity's sake.
Thank you.
Jeffrey's motion was moved and seconded. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Nay.
Excuse me, no.
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 The motion fails.
Are we redoing the motion?
Now we're
I
redoing,
redid the
yes,
motion.
now we're
I move
redoing the
I move to
motion.
extend.
All by himself.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
move to extend the purchase and sale agreement with DevCo within the parameters established during our executive session.
I will second that.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. I was a little thick on what he was trying to do there, but I understand now. Thank you.
I was a little thick on where he was going, but he was right.
There it is. Sure.
Okay. Let's go to the next item, which is asset preservation.
Good evening, President Gregory, members of the board, Superintendent New, our students, parents, community, and staff. I am pleased to present the first annual building conditions report. I am doing this with honor. I guess I'm honored to present this information because the credit for the preparation of the document that I believe you have, the binders, either you received them yesterday or tonight in regards to our first annual asset preservation program. The work in compiling, in doing the actual building conditions review and compiling the report belongs to the Director of Support Services, Cindy Wendland, and Jason Nelson, the boots on the ground who did our first building conditions report. And I am extremely grateful for the work that they have done to bring us to this point. So, as you know, working with more directly with facilities is an expansion of my roles. As a homeowner, I typically know if there's something wrong with a building, if I flip a light switch on and electrical sparks fly out of it, or if I flush the toilet and the water doesn't do what I expected it to do. So this is certainly a much bigger opportunity for me, and I appreciate always being in Federal Way to have opportunities to learn more about what we're doing. So in our executive limitation 10, which is also labeled asset preservation, but 10.3, that indicates that we will ensure a program of preventative maintenance. And there are, as I mentioned, this is the first annual submittal, and when I talk about this annual submittal, it's an annual submittal to the Board of Directors, but it's also an annual submittal to the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. And this annual submittal is required now for all school districts in the state in order to retain our eligibility for school construction assistance, also commonly known as state match, which has been certainly critical to our ongoing efforts in modernizing and building schools. So tonight I'm going to go over a few pieces of information just to set the framework. I'll review the timeline of the whole asset preservation program, and of course everything in our world has an acronym, and this acronym is APP. I'll review the parameters of the asset preservation program. I'll talk to you a little bit about what we're doing when we're evaluating building conditions by sharing with you the state designated evaluation categories and components, the state defined scoring definitions, so similar to standards-based education with scoring rubrics, and the actual results of this first building condition review. And then I will share with you the next steps that Director Wendland is put into place as a result of this first review. This timeline for implementing the asset preservation program actually has its roots in legislative action that required school districts to adopt a policy related to school facilities, which we did, and we did that in December of 2009, and the policy was 6902 was adopted. In October of 2012, Resolution 2012-35 was presented to the board, which underlined our commitment or reinforced our commitment to maintain the infrastructure of district facilities by implementing this state-defined asset preservation system. And tonight you get the first annual condition report. So I think it's important to understand when we're talking about the state's asset preservation program that as our first step, the buildings that were first reviewed were buildings that were completed after 1993 that received state school construction assistance funding. So it might feel a little backwards, but it's the way we have to start this program to do all of the building condition evaluations. We have to start with the buildings that have been built in the last 20 years that have received school construction funding. It's important to note that the completion date or the trigger date is determined by the date of board acceptance of the project, not by the occupancy date. And when we get a little farther down in the PowerPoint, I have a grid of the schools that we evaluated and their scores, and you'll see some fairly significant differences between occupancy dates and completion dates, or dates of acceptance by the board. But it's that completion date that triggers the next cycle of eligibility for school construction assistance. When we also first started down this journey of evaluating buildings, the rubrics had a top score of 90%, or a good rating, ranging down to unsatisfactory, or a 0% rating. And like all good opportunities, the parameters, the scoring rubric changed during the process of evaluating our building conditions, and a new category of excellent was added. So some work was done to reevaluate what had already been evaluated, but I just want to point out to the fact that we were headed down a 0 to 90% path, and then had 100% added to us as we walk through those building conditions. So when we talk about building conditions, what are those categories and components? In terms of the scoring matrix, there are 5 categories that generate scores. Category 1 is the exterior building condition. It includes things like the foundation, exterior walls, roof, windows, doors, trims, all the things that you think of that sometimes are also referred to as the envelope of the building. Category 2 is the interior building condition. It looks obviously at floors, walls, ceilings, and fixed equipment. Category 3 are the mechanical systems: electrical, plumbing, heating, cooling, lighting. Those are the major mechanical systems that we have. Category 4 looks at the safety and building code compliance of our buildings related to exiting, fire control, fire alarms, emergency lighting, fire resistance. And Category 5 looks for our compliance with specific access to the building. And most of that access actually gets captured in Category 1 and 2 when you're talking about the exterior and the interior of the building. How you get into the building if you're differently abled, how do you maneuver through the building if you're differently abled. The scoring definitions include excellent, and I'm not going to read all of this to you. Excellent, good, fair, poor, and unsatisfactory. So those are the 5 scores that each of the different categories and components can receive. So this next slide is a busy slide, but these are the buildings that are our first cut at evaluating the building condition results. These are the buildings that had completion dates after 1993 and received school construction assistance funding. So that very first line, for example, you'll notice is Rainier View Elementary School. You'll see that it had an occupancy date of 1992. It was accepted by the board as complete on January 10th, 1994. Now, so remember, there's a difference between when we can occupy a building and when that punch list is actually done and we accept the project as complete. The state would indicate that a building that had been accepted as complete in January of 1994 would probably score about 75%. And you can see that the evaluation of Rainier View generated a score of 90%. And then you can go on down the list and see Green Gables, Meredith Hill, Sahali Middle School, Enterprise. I want to point out Enterprise Elementary because the building was occupied in 1994, but due to some outstanding litigation, the project was not accepted as final until February 26th of 2001, 7 years later. So we have asked OSPI to consider modifying the completion date for Enterprise to something that looks more like our normal 18 months to 2 years between occupancy and final acceptance. Again, because if you think about Enterprise, it will be 20 years old in oh gee, now. But it won't trigger state match funding for another 7 years because it wasn't accepted as complete until 2001. So the next steps, and again, you'll see these next steps outlined in the Asset Preservation Handbook. You'll find in your handbook that there is a page for each one of the schools that was listed. Let me go back to that slide. So there's a tab in your handbook for each one of the schools. You'll see a summary page, and then you will see the summary of the building conditions that were evaluated, ranging from the excellent, good, fair, poor, and unsatisfactory, or not rated because the building might not have something like air conditioning, for example. So again, these scores and this building condition rating summary is a part of an online system that OSPI has every school district in the state utilizing. Our next steps as we look at moving forward is to implement the identified improvements in the preventative maintenance program. We are completing an internal review, an internal building conditions review of all of our buildings, not just the ones that have been built in the last 20 years that have received school construction assistance, because we want that information as a baseline for developing long-term plans, both short and long-term plans for our buildings. And in addition to that, you might recall that you recently authorized through a board resolution and something called the D1, a building conditions assessment, which is more commonly called a study and survey, that will be conducted by an approved independent third party. So we will have our own internal study and survey, if I can use that phrase, or building conditions evaluation, and we will have a third party building conditions evaluation. So we'll have an opportunity to gauge our evaluation against a third party and make adjustments if needed based on that information. And that is the end of my presentation for the Asset Preservation Program as submitted to you as information this evening. Are there any questions for myself or Director Wendland or the actual boots on the ground?
I have a question. So if I look at the Asset Preservation Report for Valhalla Elementary, which is one of the schools that I'm familiar with and one of the new constructions, my assumption would be some of the actions we would see here would not have been issues that still were on the punch list from the original construction issues, or could they be? Like the acoustical issue has never been resolved since the building was built, and whether, so it's here as a follow-up item, but is it a follow-up because it's a new issue, or is it an issue that's never been right since the building was?
So you're talking about repairing the acoustical ceiling tiles?
Well, the acoustical ceiling tiles. There's been noise kinds of issues in that building since, yeah.
So that's a more minor piece.
Okay.
That would be like if one of these tiles was damaged or knocked out.
Okay.
So repairing that.
Okay.
This is not talking about modifying the overall acoustical design of the building beyond what has currently been done.
Okay, so when I look at the approval for Valhalla, if we go back at 98%, and it was approved by the board on July 26, 2011, the assumptions would be that then everything that was on the original punch list should have been fixed and repaired, right?
Correct.
As of 2011.
Within the specifications of the original construction
what was on the
bid.
construction page.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And we do know that there are some outstanding issues, whether you look at Meredith Hill or you look at Valhalla or Panther Lake, that we are continuing to work with. So Meredith Hill's score, for example, even though the state standard was 78%, is a little lower right now because the fire suppression system, the fire alarm system, is not operational. So you can't get an excellent, good, or fair rating on a system that's not operational. And this has been something that we've been working with all year, but at that moment in time of doing the building condition evaluation, you had to give it a score reflective of how it was operating. We have been continuing to work diligently with the architects of Valhalla and Panther Lake to work specifically with the heating and ventilating systems in those two schools to see if we can't find a more consistent and stable solution. So that has provided opportunities for many conversations for Cindy and I this year, along with a number of the staff at the Support Service Center. And we believe we're getting closer. I wouldn't tell you we were perfect yet.
Thanks.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, these are the things that need to be fixed at each one of these individual schools in order for us to continue to get state match. Is that?
You know, what's required is that we submit the building condition report. What we want to do internally is to develop a robust, if I can use that word, preventative maintenance system. And that since we have these building condition reports in front of us now, where there have been items that have been identified that we need to work on in the short term, that helps Director Wendland and her crew prioritize work orders as they come through, or prioritize preventative maintenance. And again, we would hope to have that same list of small items, just like if you walk through your house prior to selling it, there may be some things that you want to do on that list. There are things that we want to make sure we're addressing on our list for all of our buildings, not just our school buildings, but our support buildings too. So the state pass is, you said 78%? Or there was a number that... Oh, I think when I was talking about them, so the state, along with their scoring rubric, has a sort of expected percentage score based on the perceived age of the building, which is derived by the completion date. And so it's just it's a benchmark. It's a benchmark to compare yourself against. It's like comparing yourself against the Washington State Report Card. How does Federal Way as a school district compare to the Washington State Report Card? How do individual schools compare to the Washington State Report Card? This is a similar mechanism where there's a statewide definition that we can compare ourselves to. So we can look at the state benchmark and we can look at our baseline, and again have that baseline assessed by an independent third party and move forward. Again, we'll have this opportunity to do this annually now, and are looking forward to that opportunity.
The reason I'm asking this kind of series of questions is to try to understand what our potential liabilities could be in the event that we know that something's wrong, someone gets hurt, and we knew, and we weren't obligated to fix it because we passed a state score, but it was something we should have worked to fix because it was a health concern.
Safety issues have always been a top concern. Health concerns are more difficult. I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by health concerns.
I mean, just whether or not we're going to, I'm curious as to whether or not we'd be held accountable. What the purpose for this is the state holding us or wanting us to submit this. What is the purpose for them wanting this information?
Well, I think as any public entity, we have an obligation to our taxpayers to wisely invest our tax dollars in these facilities. And this is a level of accountability that has been introduced into the K-12 system, and the carrot attached to that level of accountability is state school construction assistance. So if you were to choose not to do this and not to do the process, the state process around asset preservation, which I think is just one layer, it's an accountability layer, then we could choose to forfeit school construction funding. There's nothing that says we have to apply for school construction funding. We do that because it's a relief in terms of tax burden to our taxpayers. And so the state has an investment in our buildings, as do our local taxpayers. And this is a statewide methodology that's relatively new, that provides that level of assurance or that benchmark and baseline data for people to secure information from.
Is there a dollar amount attached to this report? Because I didn't see anything on it.
No, not at this point in time. We are working to understand the building condition needs of all of the buildings, and you will see, as I've mentioned before in my budget presentations, if I go put my more comfortable budget hat on, our need to make some strategic investments in building maintenance, and part of that conversation with the superintendent prior to his recommendation to you will be to help identify what that looks like.
And so Mr. Nelson is the one that performed this
Yes.
report? Were teachers also included in this process, or was that just a?
Yes.
Hi, good evening. I'm Director Windland. To answer your question, Tony, if we did not do the system, so if we did not go and look at our buildings to see if we're maintaining them, we will lose funding. So not all districts have done this, so I just got an email now from OSPI, from Tom Carver, that basically has reminded everybody that they need to get their scoring in order to not jeopardize future funding for construction. When we went around, when Jason went around from building to building, we checked in with the office. He went into every classroom. And in doing so, you know, classes were going, so he tried not to be disruptive, but he did and welcomed questions, concerns. We started a list of our own, so I have a detailed list from him that says what classroom has what going on. Through that, we'll put that into our work order system and then start fixing what we need to fix and take care of. And then after that, we'll look at our preventative maintenance schedule to see if there's some things that need to be on a preventative maintenance schedule versus just a reactionary schedule. So that's where the system comes into place. I'm not sure, and I can wait and find out and talk to Tom Carver through OSPI to how this actually works, is the dollar amount we get for doing this. But I can tell you if we didn't do it, there would be zero. So I hope that answers your question. And if not, I'd be willing to go back and research more.
It does. The point that I was trying to make is that if at one of these locations, God forbid, something bad happened, that we overlooked or didn't see, we should have, we missed it. And I heard Sally mention the independent review that we're going to get as well. I just want to make sure that we're covered, because we've got projects in phase 2, I believe, that we'll be having conversations about building other buildings that need to be replaced as well. And losing that state match could be pretty horrible.
Yeah. Meredith Hill, we are in the process, so we have, there's a letter that went out to staff explaining the process, where we are in it, because since we're working with other jurisdictions and permitting, they are up to date on what we're doing. We have staff in there from security that put in our fire. We did some of the construction ourselves, and then we have another company coming in and to do more. Hopefully that will be done within the next month or so. But things like when you look through what we have, some of our ADA requirements for our doors are not operational the way we want them to be. So we want them to be operational for all community members to go into our schools. So we're putting them in our program, and then we'll fix them. And then we'll maintain them.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would just like to say, for several years now, ever since I've been on the board, this has been an area that I have looked to contend for, an area that I think we could have done better as a district. And I just want to commend the district tonight for, this is transformational, this step, what I see what's doing right here. That is something we've done in the past, maybe worried about liabilities and that kind of stuff, and I thought we did that. But the work I'm seeing right now, I'm very pleased with, and I want to thank you, Director Wedland, Mr. Nelson, for the work you're doing, the excellence with what you're doing. Obviously, the times when state gives you certain things, there's kind of like a low threshold that you have to hit. And what I see here tonight is excellence and a desire, as I look at these next steps, that we're not just stopping at just kind of at this checklist and reporting the state, but it's how do we make our schools better, and how do we really become aware of what is it that we need to take, talk about the preventative maintenance and those kinds of things. And for me, I get excited about that. And so I want to thank you, the district, for being responsive to that. As a board, we've been talking about this for quite some time, about how can we do this better. and I see this as big steps moving in that direction. And so, I know, as speaking as a board member, I look forward to hearing recommendations coming up this spring on how the board can get behind, partner those areas that maybe have been neglected, areas that or that we can really help our facilities, because it's asset preservation. That's what taxpayers want to see, is how are we taking care of what we have, those levies that we pass, how are we investing, and how are we taking care of what the community has given us. So thank you for your work, and I look forward to the great results we're going to see in the future from you and your team. So thank you again.
Could I just ask one question? So when we have a building that's not really a permanent building like a Taft Academy, how does that fit into this? I know it's not. It isn't. Is it an? Is it an asset? And so how does that fit into this system of?
We're doing the same evaluation to Taft Academy. We have completed, I think, Jason Nautilus at Adelaide. We're moving on to Mark Twain. We will eventually do this same structure, the same standard to all our district businesses or buildings, excuse me. They're all our assets. So, and then we'll develop a list of where we can improve, what trends are we seeing that are the same, and maybe those need to be part of our preventative maintenance. It can also help us build a budget around what we need, paint and patch. We know we need some schools painted, we know we need some rooms painted, but there's a big cost to that, so maybe we can start building a schedule around how we're going to do that.
And that's the kind of stuff I appreciate, is that there's those kinds of forethought and steps. So thank you for doing that work.
You're welcome. And I want to thank Jason Nelson, because he did extremely a lot of work to get this done.
So one last question. I know we've got a lot to still cover, but can you give me an idea of how you're going to present the other schools? So you said you've done Adelaide and Nautilus, and when will we see those other schools and the other results? Do we have a plan with that yet or not yet?
I can present it.
I just wondered if you
there's quite a few schools to do.
Right.
So I think what I would ask is that I can do them two ways. I can do part of them and present in parts, A, B, C, or I can do all the elementaries next.
Right.
I'm...
And I'm not trying to just,
no, it's
I just
okay.
wondered how you're going to do it, and if there was a plan. If there's not, just let us know when you have
I'm going to
that
present them
figured
the same way I did this. The same way, because it gives me a list of what we have to focus on. Mm-hmm. So does that help? Did I answer your question? I hope I did.
Good enough. Thank you.
Okay.
So the one thing I just want to point out as a conclusion to the summary is that while there may be individual concerns, and there will always be individual concerns about buildings, whether I'm in my own office and I think it's too warm or too cluttered, too small, or somewhere else.
Too bad.
The overall conversation, the overall condition of our buildings is good, and I want to praise the work of our maintenance staff and our custodial staff and our ground staff, because they've done that on a shoestring budget. I will bring you comparative data when we do the budget presentation, but we have added square footage in our district over the last 10 years and have virtually added no staff, no MSOC dollars. And so I was pleased by these results and think that we should all take great pride in the work that we have done to preserve our taxpayer dollars and the assets that we have.
Very much. We're now moving to synergistic contract approval to negotiate. Oh, sorry.
I'm so glad my microphone is on automatically, because I would do the same thing. So tonight I wanted to provide you with a quick overview related to again, Executive Limitation 10 related to asset preservation, but Executive Limitation 4 in that, or dot 4, is about energy assessments and energy savings. And this evening, as a reminder, we have a history of actively managing our energy costs. And as I previously reported in EL 10, our utility costs per pupil are the lowest of all neighboring districts. Now, there's many ways to measure that. Per pupil is a number or that is easiest to measure by, because not all the square footage is always reported. Synergistics, and we have two representatives from the Synergistics, the energy conservation company, has approached us to work with us to generate even more savings. I have Ed Graff and Lynn Pace here this evening. Synergistics is a nationwide company that works with not just school districts, but a variety of entities to help find ways to obtain even additional net savings. The net savings that Synergistics has estimated that we may be able to obtain over the next 5.5 years is estimated at $2.6 million. So again, not an insignificant amount to entice us to perhaps change our utility consumption patterns. Some of the components of the Synergistics model is they have a set of technology and data tools that can help uncover opportunities for savings. So for example, they can run energy consumption models in different buildings and perhaps discover for us that there's time that electrical consumption in a building at 10 o'clock at night is much higher than than it should be. So we can investigate that and determine whether or not there's something that we could do to modify that energy conservation. And again, I'm doing these in simplistic terms. One of the things that I'm most excited about this potential contractual relationship is that Synergistic has a host of engineers and other energy experts. So while we work hard to understand the various control systems, because mechanical systems are really not mechanical systems. I mean, they are still mechanical systems, but they're run by electronic systems. And getting the two to balance, and when you have different kinds of electronic controls in every building, it will be great to be able to rely on a bank of experts who may be able to help us get that last piece, to get to the last piece of the slab floor heating in our 4 elementary schools that we continue to struggle with. They may help us figure out why the boilers keep blowing out. Not blowing up, but the turning off. How about we say turning off? And I'm looking forward to leaning on that expertise. They have a host of proven principles of organizational behavior to change organizational behavior. I think that might be part of their trade secret. And so I'm looking forward to find out what those strategies would be. And then they have a software product called Energy Cap, which is an industry standard that they will use to calculate savings. One of the reasons I'm bringing this actual contract to you this evening is because it is unique. Usually when we enter into contracts with vendors, they're for a year or maybe 2 years. And so I think it's important in the term of transparency and disclosure to understand that the contract we're talking about negotiating is a multi-year document. Basically, it ends up being a 5.5-year commitment. Because I am your worry about things from a financial perspective, and obviously Synergistics is making a commitment to the district. There are substantial termination fees in the contract. So if we decide after a year or 2 or 3 or even in year 5 that we would want to terminate the contract, you need to be aware that there are termination fees. If we enter into this contract, or when we enter into this contract, assume based on board motion, you need to know those termination fees can also potentially be assessed if it's deemed that we're failing to implement the program that Synergistics has designed. Now, obviously, we're not going to enter into this partnership if we don't intend to implement the program, but I have to just ring the little worry bell or the knowledge bell so that you're aware of that. Savings are calculated from a base year, and they are based on our consumption changes, not necessarily on rate changes. So none of us have control over the utility companies and the rate changes they may submit to the Washington Commission, that's not its full name, about what they might need to have, or to Lake Haven utility districts, or any of that. But one of the ways we continue to have the lowest utility costs is because we have managed that consumption. So even though we have gone through rate changes, our utility costs have stayed low. So this evening, I am asking, there's a motion in front of you to authorize the superintendent or designee to complete the contract negotiations. And once those contract negotiations are complete, Synergistics begins a facilities and mechanical assessment. We will be recruiting and hiring 2 energy specialists who will work with our staffs to help identify modifications that we can make. And obviously then we'll develop an energy management action plan to actually implement. So that is the extent of my presentation related to this particular new venture of ours. And I believe you do have a motion on your motion sheet this evening. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, let's begin with the motion.
I move to authorize the superintendent or designee the authority to complete negotiations on a 5-year contract with Synergistics.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion?
So is it a 5-year or 5.5-year agreement?
Well, the quick start period is a 6-month period, but I believe the contract actually ends up being a full 5.5 years. Yes? Yes.
Question. I was reading over the information that you sent on this contract, and it seems that their compensation is based on something that looks like a commission of savings, on saving how much they save?
It's the energy cap calculation, which is based on changes in consumption.
So if there's a termination fee attached to this, I'm just curious about the implementation costs and whether or not we would be able to afford it and how that would affect.
So the expected $2.6 million net savings subtracts the costs that we might incur. So we know we have to pay the software licensing fee for the Energy Cap software. And we know that the 2 energy specialists will be our employees working jointly with the district and with Synergistics. And again, that net savings takes into account those, what you might call new costs as we look at this venture.
And my second question is, will they be working with the rebuild at Federal Way High School? Has that been discussed as well? Or?
I have not had that conversation.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. We're now moving to budget update.
So this evening, I would like to present to you the state budget impacts as we understand them tonight, and share a little bit of the work that came out of the work study related to local priorities. 2 weeks ago, or at the last board meeting, when I last presented budget, the legislature had not yet adjourned. I think this is the first time the legislature has actually adjourned on time, probably for about 5 years. So while we are not sure that all the work that we needed done was completed, it is nice to at least have a roadmap that we can follow as we prepare this particular budget recommendation. Several of I'm just going to go back through the components that we had talked about before, the major components that existed in the governor's budget, the House budget, and the Senate budget. And the first of those is the K-1 high poverty funding. As I mentioned before, 20 of our 23 schools serving K-1 students may be eligible for high poverty funding. Revenue allocations, maximum revenue allocations are funded at a class size of 20.3. As we discussed previously, actual school-by-school average class size must be at 20.3, but we're unlikely to receive that maximum funding. We have a system of neighborhood schools. Neighborhood schools take all students living in their boundaries, and we know we have some physical building space as a constraint for maximizing this funding. However, we will do everything in our power to ensure that we can get as close to 20.3 on a building-by-building basis as we can. Tied to that K-1 high poverty and the physical building space constraint, you may recall that outside of the general fund or the operating budget, there was a supplemental capital budget that had a $700 million request for funding to add classrooms, to accommodate smaller class sizes. Unfortunately, that supplemental capital budget failed. This is the second year in a row that a capital budget has had some proposals for increasing space for K-12 schools that has failed. So the legislature has some work to do, because you can't expect schools to reduce class size to an average of 17 when McCleary is fully implemented and not provide some financial support for that to actually happen. The material supplies and operating costs, or MSOC, the actual funding increases from $737.02 per average annual student FTE to $848.04. OSPI generates budget estimates for school districts, and OSPI estimates that our increase will be about $2.2 million. Our actual increase will be around that, but budget factors, so they're using our 13-14 budget and the factors we had in our 13-14 budget to make that estimate. As we move forward into 14-15, obviously we change a lot of assumptions and underlying data. But $2.2 million will allow us to make some strategic investments in some areas where we desperately need to. Curriculum and instructional materials, student technology, and building maintenance. And I will guarantee you right now that the list that Teaching for Learning will prepare, that the Information Technology Department will prepare, and that the Support Service Center will prepare in terms of needs for MSOC will far exceed $2.2 million. But I am still excited to make some strategic investments in these areas. The additional instructional hours, actually your next agenda item related to the school calendar has been hanging a bit in limbo because the legislative session in 2013 was going to require an increase in instructional hours in grades 7 through 12. That increase was repealed and replaced with an increase in the state graduation requirements, increasing the state graduation requirements from 20 to 24. Remember, here in Federal Way, we're already at 23 and a half. Those new graduation requirements come into play beginning with the class of 2019. The legislature also revised some revenue formula factors in order to help support schools, high schools in particular, or schools serving grades 9 through 12. They changed revenue formula factors for 9 through 12 MSOC, lab science class sizes, and counselors. We have not seen specific guidance yet about formula factors. Usually revenue is revenue, and the local school board gets to make the decision about how to spend that revenue. But sometimes we're seeing more and more strings attached, like with the K-3 high poverty funding. So we're still waiting for additional guidance with that piece. I just want to reiterate, for the 6th consecutive year, there was no COLA or any other type of salary allocation increase granted for K-12 employees. This continues to put pressure on all K-12 employers in the state of Washington, along with our employees. The NCLB waiver, Superintendent New mentioned earlier, the legislature failed to adopt required changes in teacher evaluation methodologies. There are many unknowns related to this. The two biggest include Title I sanctions, or as Superintendent New referred to, punishments. We may possibly have to set aside or reallocate up to $1 million of our Title I money. And then we're not sure about what will happen with our Race to the Top funding. That's the quick synopsis of the state budget. Before I move into a recap of the budget priorities that we talked about at the work study, are there any questions about the state budget piece? So last year, when we recognized that the legislature was bound by the state Supreme Court to begin implementing McCleary or begin funding the new funding formulas, we created 3 guiding principles, so to speak, in regards to the general fund budget. One of those was to provide relief to taxpayers and parents. Certainly this year you saw that happen in terms of an optional rollback of the educational programs and operations levy below our legal mandate, and in the elimination of fees in our general fund programs in almost every area, ranging from music to CTE classes. We have a guiding principle to move towards market midpoint compensation, even though the legislature has the primary responsibility for providing salary allocations for K-12 employees. We still believe we need to try to continue to move towards market midpoint. And then, of course, the bullet that's always important to me is that any and all restorations and enhancements must be affordable and sustainable. It is exciting, as I mentioned before, to be talking about the ability to add. We need to temper our appetite and make sure we're not adding more than we can afford to sustain over the long term. When we talk about 2014-15 budget priorities, we have a whole host of new and continuing state and federal mandates, ranging from TPEP, the Teacher Principal Evaluation Program, to Common Core State Standards, Smarter Balanced, Core 24, smaller class sizes in high poverty schools, No Child Left Behind sanctions, and federal sequestration. I mean, that's just a sort of a glimmer of the things that we're that the superintendent New is leading us through. Obviously, we have a strong commitment to increasing on-time graduation and the various strategies and supports that we found effective this year, continuing to expand on those next year. We're looking forward to expanding our parent and community engagement process. You've heard me say this several times now, making strategic investments in MSOC, looking at our student extracurricular activities and determining whether there are some budget priorities we can implement there, and maintaining that. Last but not least, because remember, 85 cents out of every dollar we spend is spent on compensation, providing sustainable market compensation. So that is the framework that we are utilizing now to prepare a budget recommendation for the board's consideration. Timelines are marching forward with the superintendent's preliminary budget recommendation tentatively scheduled for May 13th, with the first public hearing on June 10th and the second public hearing and adoption for June 24th. And that concludes my presentation this evening. Are there questions or comments I can take?
Questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much, Sally. That was a lot to cover in a short time.
Thank you.
And now?
You don't have to listen to me.
We are moving on to the state board waiver, which Sally mentioned, and Cindy Black is handling that.
Good evening. Let's get this going here. All right, good evening again. Board President Gregory, board members, and Superintendent New. As Sally mentioned, we're here tonight to talk a little bit about 2 calendar issues related to student-led conferences and also our day-to-day waivers. So I have just a brief history about where we are with that, and then an action for you guys at the end of this presentation. So we've started student-led conferences. Back in the day, they were 7 early release days, 5 in the fall, 2 in the spring. They were usually very much teacher-driven and also mainly between the teacher and the parent. The student was not very much involved in those early conference times. And then came something called ELERS, which you might remember, which were the essential academic learning requirements that were the original standards that had been identified at the state level. And we began realizing that if we didn't have student engagement in those conversations, that we were missing a really critical piece about helping kids to be able to meet the standards. And so in 2002, Federal Way Public Schools moved to student-led conferences. And with that, they also made a choice to eliminate all of our early release days, kind of eliminating the impact on the academic program, because the more days you kind of affect as you have half days in school, school becomes kind of a holiday during those times. And then also our parents as well, having to deal with finding out another 5 or 6 days of early release time to find childcare for their students. So we went to the 2 full days in the spring and 2 full days in the fall for those conference days. And when we did that, that was at the era where you could call them a student, they would count as your contact hours and instructional hours because students were a part of that. But then several years ago, they changed that, and now we require a waiver from the state to be able to get those days approved. Also want to note that Sally had talked about the 1080 and all of that, and she has done the math for us, and with the this waiver for the conference days, we are still under the appropriate contact instructional hours with that. So that's just a little bit of history around our student-led conference. This will be, I think, since 2002, we've had to renew it twice. So we're coming to you tonight to be able to renew that application for that waiver, as well as with our day-to-days. So another thing that started in 2002 was a very busy year as we were looking at the onset of standards and all of that, was that we requested and was awarded a waiver in order to be able to have what we call day-to-days. And those were specifically designed for schools and teachers to be able to look at assessment data and really be able to do some planning with good chunks of time set aside to be able to go deep in those conversations rather than just fitting time in and out the day when you know that time is such a hard thing to find in a given school day. And so we were able to go through processes, as I was a building principal at that time, where we'd involve our staff, we'd pull out all of our data, we looked at our WASL data at that time. Now they're looking at their MSP data or their HISP data. District assessments, classroom assessments, we've looked at discipline, demographics, all of the data that goes into helping us know how to affect an appropriate learning environment for our kids and ultimately make a difference for student achievement. So we're here today now after having lived through many years of day-to-days with even more reason to go forward with those. One of those reasons has to do with the implementation of the Common Core state standards, which have a large increase in rigor, where teachers really need to be looking at where kids are at specifically and be able to scaffold learning activities to reach the level of rigor that will allow kids to meet the standard. So we have that piece. And we also have the implementation of the new teacher evaluation system, which requires teachers to set goals for students, groups of students in their classrooms, and also whole classroom goals, and being able to progress monitor and see how that is and collect data that would be hopefully showing a trajectory of growth towards meeting those goals at the end of the year. And so just a couple more reasons why we need to continue to build time in that's specifically focused to allow for those discussions to happen at schools. And again, the waiver also meets the minimum standards for contact time and instructional time. So the schedule that we have in place right now accommodates the offsetting of the days that we're requesting.
So we've created an application to the state for 2 waiver requests, one for 4 student-led conference days and one for 3 data days. And that's why you have the resolutions in front of you to be able to take a look and see if you'll be able to support us as we make that application to the state. Any questions about that?
Questions?
So is it a total of 7 days?
Mm-hmm.
And the total number of instruction days will go from 180 to 177?
173.
173.
Mm-hmm. And that's been in place, like I said, since 2002.
Any other questions? Let's move to Resolution 2014-01.
I move that the Board of Education adopt Resolution 2014-1, requesting a waiver of the minimum 180-day requirement for the 2014-2015, 2015-2016, and 2016-2017 school years to allow for 3 non-student days.
Discussion? Or
I
second. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Discussion?
Madam President, I know that the time is really important, but I'm really concerned about going down in the number of days. I hear the number of hours, but we're going to be talking about our ends too here in just a moment, and some of the benchmarks that were put in that weren't reached, and so going down 7 days is a concern for me, and I just wanted to put that on the table so we could have a discussion about that if somebody else was thinking that.
I guess for me, I look at it as data days, SLCs are, I think, part of helping that student achievement. Obviously, with the demands on teachers, if it's something is that important, we want to create pockets for that. So I guess that's just my consideration is if it's something valuable, then obviously that's what I see these resolutions for, is saying that this is time well spent, that will pay dividends for our students and our teachers.
I think the use of data is also increased, and so data days are meant to really allow teachers the time to be able to individualize. So although it may be fewer days in class, the time they are there is more focused and more individualized to meet their individual needs because of the time they've been able to spend to unpack and to really look at individual achievement. So it is kind of a balance, but without looking at data and without using data to drive your instruction and practice, kids could be sitting in class for many more days than that, and time alone in seat does not change student outcomes. So I would look for the data to be able to inform instruction, and we may see hopefully more change in even a shorter period of time because it's individualized.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Motion carries. Resolution 2014-02.
President Gregory, I move that the Board of Education adopt Resolution 2414-02, requesting a waiver of the minimum 180-day requirement for the 14-15, 15-16, and 16-17 school years to allow for 4 non-student days for participation in student-led conferences.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion? Claire, do you want to speak to your motion? Do you want to speak to your motion?
No, I think all I can say is being a parent who started in 2002, student-led conferences is how I've seen and understood the depth and the rigor of knowledge that my children are learning. And when they can show me what they're learning and show me their knowledge, I still have an opportunity to interact with teachers, but it's more about them being able to talk about that with me. So I'm in total support of time for student-led conferences and hope the board is as well.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
Okay, we're now moving to the policy review area. And the first item before us is ENDS 2, which we have had presentations on. And now the question becomes whether or not the board feels that the work that was done last year makes the district in compliance with ENDS 2. And for those of you who aren't familiar with ENDS 2, it says each student at every grade level will perform at or above the state or district standard in all disciplines. Each student's progress shall be measured annually by academic growth. Is there a motion?
President Gregory, I submit a motion that we are not in compliance based on the ENDS 2 results that we have for this year.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, discussion?
So being new to the board, part of what we talked about with ENDS 1 is that we didn't set the standards that were established by the board, and so I had questions about, and even though we didn't meet graduation, I approved it last month. Based on where we're at and how many of these individual areas that we've missed, and again set by the previous boards and the decisions on what was going to be looked at, we've not met those standards in many of these categories. Along with that comment, I'd like to say that I think we as a board we need to look at, that we begin to look at cohort data and look at it differently. We talk about looking at every individual student, and when we look at it and compare a third grade class that's now going to be fourth grade, but we compare it to the third grade class behind them to see where we're at to meeting the standards, we're not taking care of individualized students. And I think we need to look at, reevaluate what information we're looking at when we see our progress to make sure that we're truly looking at each individual student. And that's why I say we're not in compliance.
Further discussion?
Madam President, we also, the previous board put in some benchmarks. There were also statistical things that were given to us by our by Dave Davis, that where he said we missed a few targets that are concerning to me, and I, not being a fan of averaging, believe that if we pass it, we do. If we don't, then we try again.
I'm a proponent of process of change takes place over time. And so what I'm looking for is, has there been any progress made? Because as President Gregory talked about, although we have targets to meet, we also have to understand who the students are that we're working with. And if we expect 100%, we will strive always for 100%, and we always shall. But I'm not going to take less than 100% as not meeting our mark. For me, it's the progress. And are we beginning to make progress? And we now have data that we've not had before, and I think people have a mistaken belief that there's been a lot of information and data that's been unpacked about demographics and about students and such that's been available to help impact teaching and individual teaching in classrooms. And I think it is still a relatively new piece of work, and we are now really engaging in data coaching and using data protocols to understand how to look at data and not just look at the number, but look at the children and the faces behind those numbers and what they bring to the classroom with them. So I just want to make sure that it isn't a failure, because teaching goes on in our classrooms every single day, and children are successful and children fail, and we will continue to need to work. But I also don't want to send a message out that we're not making progress and that we're not taking quality teaching and intentional teaching very, very seriously.
And so I'd like to comment on that I'm not pointing out to any individual students or individual teachers. Based on what we've established as N2s as a board, we did not meet. So it needs to be reevaluation from the board and what we're looking at. I'm not saying that this district isn't making progress. I'm not saying that we aren't making areas. But if we look at N2, how it is written, and what has been presented, we have failed. And again, I think we need to relook at that, and I will make an additional motion after this that we look at this differently going forward.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion that the board deem ends to be not in compliance, which is student achievement. All those in favor of not in compliance signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Motion carries.
Madam President, I'd like to make a motion that we establish a series of academic achievement goals based on our formative and summative cohort assessment data that we can analyze going forward for INS 2.
Is there a second to that motion?
Madam President, I would ask for greater clarity as to the motion.
Okay.
So based on where we currently stand and what we're looking at, it's OSPI data and AMO information. And I believe that if we're going to look at every individual student, that we need to be able to compare that information year over year at a school level, drilling down all the way to the individual students. So what I'm requesting is this board looks at the information differently. I understand we have to understand OSPI information, but when we look at that and compare third grade students from last year to third grade students this year, and we see a decrease, we're not comparing apples to apples, but we're actually comparing apples to oranges. And if we're going to look at individual students and understand where they're at, we need to be able to compare third grade last year to fourth grade this year in each school and all the way down to the individual student. And that's actually what I'm asking for the district at this point, is for us to begin to look at that and how we evaluate INS 2 going forward.
Madam President, I'll second that for the conversation, for the
Okay.
discussion.
Discussion? Further discussion?
I guess my wonder would be, as a board who operates under policy governance, at what level are we looking at systems, and at what level are we looking at individual children? Because we are not working with individual children. And so what I would want to know is what systems are in place, what staff are doing as they look at cohort data and reporting out on that. But it concerns me as a board member to think about looking at individual student data on 22,000 students without necessarily the pedagogy or the knowledge behind what it's going to take to move the needle. Do you know what I'm saying? That I believe that there's a level of expertise that we need to listen to, and we need to maybe ask some different questions from our staff about what they're doing and how they're using cohort data. But I worry about a board at a policy governance level thinking about looking at individual children and their progress. Not that it's not important, child by child, but is that our role as a board that operates under policy governance?
Further discussion?
And so what I would, in furthering the discussion from Director Wilson, I would be concerned about that as well. And I think the reason that I would entertain the conversation is failure. If we're not hitting the targets, then it does. There at some point we have to have conversations as far down as we need to in order to get to the success that we all seek. To where that ends, where that goes, I'm not sure, but I want to have the conversation about it anyway.
I'd just like to say, obviously I understand Director McAnally's value in seeing that. I don't share the same value or need as a board to see that data that he feels that insistence. So I'm not going to be voting for that just because I don't think as a board policy it's something that we need to pursue.
So I guess the question I would ask to the three board members that are here previously, when we look at the statistics out of INS 2, right? And I'm not saying that I'm requesting or demanding from the district that we look at 22,000 children. But if we look at an individualized school year over year and we see a decrease, then we can drill down into that one and begin to ask questions. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that I expect reports of 22,000 children, other than part of the pedagogy that we talk about is looking at every individualized student and teaching them individually. So if we're going to teach them at the individual level, we need to understand how they're increasing and performing year over year at the individual level. So that's my hope, is that INS 2 as it stands today is weak. So it's just a recommendation or a request at this point from the district leadership and from Superintendent New to begin to look at and bring ideas back to us I'm not mandating that we have to go down to the individual student level, but we have to do something to make sure that we're increasing every student to the best of our ability year over year and look at that data to understand where we stand.
I think that from my perspective, it's not about the individual student as much as it is accurate information. And the way it's done now, you're supposed to be doing comparative data, but it's not comparative. And while ends to compliance this year is under the rules that had been established, I suggest that we look at a variety of kinds of assessments that we use to determine how students in this district are doing, where the holes are, and it isn't as an individual child as much as the total, because that's what ends to looks at, and figure out strategies, ask that strategies be figured out that we can implement to move that needle. And, we're using the same data that every other school district is, and it's comparative, and we're suggesting that it's an inaccurate comparison.
And I just will go that, I feel like my job is to create the landscape to have those things happen, and that is by creating the vision or the policy or the finances and the fiscal pieces that go along with that. And from advanced placement to the idea of standards-based grading to all those things, individualized our learning, thinking about blended learning, thinking about technology, all of those are policies and practices and things that as a board have been put in place to allow those with that expertise and the pedagogy and the direct instruction of children to be able to do their job. So I just want to make sure that we stay at the level of asking those who are the experts, what is it that they need, acknowledging that we have to address individual students who by their diverse nature are not having their needs met, but also doing it in a way that maintains our job as visionaries and policymakers in this district.
Any further discussion?
May I?
Point of information, we're in the middle of a debate.
If that's no, that's okay.
How does the board, the superintendent wants to enter into the discussion. Do you have any problem with that?
By all means, I have none.
I'm fine.
Go ahead.
So I think you all know that I'm not a fan of standardized testing. And you also know that with Common Core state standards, we're moving to smarter balanced assessments for next year. So the assessment has changed yet again. And part of the problem that we've had is not only is it a comparative data point that we're using and not a student growth model, but it's also been changed over the years, so we have no trend analysis to work from.
Right.
In the meantime, we've implemented a new student information system. We've developed a formative assessment and data dashboard that's now online with the work of our assessment department. As you know, we have 3 targeted focus goals now with interventions on individual students. We've established an early learning department, and we've also implemented all-day kindergarten. And so the work that's happening in the district is geared towards the very conversation that you're having right now. And so what I'll need from you, and our leadership will need from you, and our staff will need from you, is a specific set of criteria that you'd like us to move toward, so that we're not bowling in the dark, and that we can begin to put together the dashboard that will include summative and formative assessment information and follow cohort analysis, so that we're following student growth. And it can be in the aggregate, but it's student growth. So I ask that the board be specific in their direction, that you as a unified body are clear about the directive and the direction that you'd like us to go. Thank you.
Further discussion?
Madam President, I'm not conflicted about the information that we were given. My only concern was just that we didn't hit the targets. So that was my concern as far as the approval of the end. As far as what we get and the modifications that the superintendent can make to the information, I see that as, I don't see that as a major hurdle for me in this.
You mean the how?
I mean the how. I mean what Director McAnalloway is asking for is additional information to make the comparison as to whether or not we're actually seeing the growth that we desire to see. It seems to me like the information that he seeks will be available. I don't know how you would lay a platform with that now that you would measure next year anyway, because we'd have to lay that information in first to find out where we actually were. So I don't know as if that's something we could even aim at right now. In other words, we don't even have the first apple to compare to the second apple, so that would have to be established by the superintendent. I'm not...
But we have a new apple coming. We have a new apple coming, which is Smarter Balance, so...
Right, and at the same
yeah.
time with that Smarter Balance, the scores are going to go down, right? So part of it is if we leave in place what we're comparing today, and we wait a year and come back to the same spot, and we're going to slip even further down, that's my concern. So we need to be able to begin to look at it in not just comparing the apples to oranges. And I understand we, again, have a change that's coming, but it's known nationwide, the Smarter Balance, your scores are going to fall further. So we can take and compare where we're at today and do testing in the next year on Smarter Balance and slip even further. Where are we going? We're going the wrong direction and not really focusing. So that's my concern, that I want us to look at how we look at the data and compare it. And I'm not trying to mandate, I'm not trying to get out of operational, but I just want us to begin to have the conversation to reevaluate INS 2 to make sure that we are doing everything we can for every student.
I guess for me, where I'd like to see this, I don't think this motion answers the question, but as I think Director Moore kind of talked about too, not the what, but the not the how, but the what we're looking at is I know this last month we looked at ENDS 1, now we're looking at ENDS 2 tonight, and there was some people that have expressed noncompliance. But what is it as a board that we're saying that we're looking for? What are the areas? And I don't see this motion really answering to that. It's just data. But what in the data are we looking for, and what is it that we're so that we're giving good feedback to the district? And so I encourage our president to lead us forward in that and making a clear statement from the board on that. So,
in response to that, what we might want to do is vote this motion down and do some work as a board with the superintendent to determine what are the best mechanisms, not that we know, but what are we, for instance, collecting here in the district that we could use to really analyze? Because I have a feeling that my sense is that it's very hard to believe that we failed in as many areas as we have. I don't think that. I think I can't reconcile what the data says and what I believe is happening, because I can't see the compatibility. And so the question is really, how do you collect data that really tells you? And if it doesn't tell you, how do you know what to do next to improve? And I think that's the quandary. So whether this is the right motion or not, maybe it's something we need to, as a group, study some more and think about, because we do need to give some direction to the superintendent.
I would suggest that we use the data coaches that we have within our district here to support us in our use of our own data, because that is something across the state that people are using. It's a new tool, and I think it isn't just numbers, and it takes a lot to unpack it, and then to unpack it and really understand. So then what is it telling us? And then not only what is it telling us, but then how does that impact instruction or anything else? And how do we know that what we think we're doing to change a trajectory for a student is actually doing that, when in fact there is a lot of, I'm going to go use it again, pedagogy behind not just reading, but what it takes for a child to learn how to read. So we just have to really be careful about knowing what we know and having those that live it every day help us understand what we think we know that we may not be clear on. And I don't know if that made sense or not, but I'm going to stop.
I guess just to reiterate what I was saying, obviously we have board superintendent relation form 5E1, and that is the feedback form, and that's one of those things that I look at where we're at now. This month we've had a work study, we've had a board meeting, and then we come tonight and to vote on noncompliance, but we yet have given more than just non-compliant, any kind of feedback, any kind of more discussion, and that is my concern as a board member moving forward. We're now moving into the next month with the next ends, and we've yet to do it for ends 1, and now for ends 2, it appears right now we're not giving any recommendations. We're just saying not compliant. And so for me, it gets back to is not necessarily how much data are we getting. Data I don't think is ever going to be perfect. It's never going to be, but we have to make decisions. But what is it that we're looking at in that data, and what kinds of trends we want to see? And that's the kind of discussion and feedback I'd like to see us as a board produce. If just in, and so that indifferent is.
Okay, right now we've got a motion on the floor. Part of, as I understand the purpose of the motion, is to give feedback. If that isn't adequate, somebody needs to recommend something else if we want to vote this down as a strategy to move forward.
And here's my concern. I've been doing this for 4 months, and we're moving 110 miles an hour. And as Director Peterson pointed out, we discussed that we were going to look at ends 1 and do it. We've gone and blown by it. We kind of touched on it and did nothing with it. We're now going to do the same things with ends 2, and I really feel like ends 2 are even farther behind based on what we're showing in statistical data, that at some point we have to stop and say, okay, yes, we're going to do something different. If we vote this down, then we're just going to move on and go to ends 3 and ends 4, and then we're going to get to summertime, and we're going to start all of a brand new school year, and we're going to come back next year and have the same ends 1 and ends 2 in place with no change. Because that's how it feels right now as a board member that's been doing this for 4 months, that I can barely keep up. So I totally agree with President Gregory that if we vote this down, what are we going to do and how are we going to do it and when are we going to do it?
I guess for me, I've only heard from 2 board members in their responses, and so it's hard for me to make a decision other than the one that I come with my own. And if the only time we have a discussion is at this meeting, this is not the place to do that kind of work. We either need to figure out a time to do it, we need to put it in as part of our practice or part of our work when we leave a work study. We need to do something in between meetings, but we have to land somewhere, and the conversation always comes back to this is a very difficult venue to do that kind of production of what we're looking for, which is conversation, but also what is the actual thing we're asking. Not just we don't like what we see, but then what is it that will move us from non-compliance to compliance? And I'm still struggling with what that is, but I'm not sure where we can have that conversation.
Madam President, so I would not have a problem voting for ends 2 to be in compliance if the data information that we received, we laid in a baseline, we put some targeted goals in, we didn't make. If we had made those targeted goals, I would have no problem saying ends 2 is in compliance. I would need to reshape it. Other directors might say I need additional information so that I can make an apples to apples comparison. I don't need any of that. Flying at 30,000 feet on this particular ends, I don't have a problem with. We gave clear instruction on where we found out where we were, we found out where we wanted to be, we didn't make where we wanted to be, and that's why I voted it not to be in compliance, not because the targeted outcomes were not good, but just because we didn't meet the goals that we set. If Director McAnally needs additional information, I'm not conflicted with him needing additional information that might help us be clearer in our vision. But the vision that was initially put in place 2 years ago with a baseline and targeted goals, I think is adequate. More information so that we're making proper comparisons. I'm not conflicted with that either.
Okay, let's vote, unless there's a strong reason not to. And we're voting on the motion. Can someone read the motion? Can you read the motion?
Establish a series of academic achievement goals based on our formative and summative cohort assessment data.
Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Nay.
Nay. Motion fails. So I recommend, and then react to this. I think this is a longer discussion we obviously need to have. And I suggest when's our next study?
Next week.
Next
Ends
week.
3.
I'm suggesting that this is a discussion we need to have before we move to ends 3. And make sure we're all on the same page. And I think Claire's right. We need to have a deeper discussion and make sure where we all are, and then we can move forward. Is there anyone that has a problem with that?
Is that a motion or is that a?
No, it isn't. It's a suggestion right now.
It's a agenda piece moving forward. Madam President, I would also recommend that the comments made by Director Peterson on ends 1 also be included in that conversation as well, and that way, moving forward, right, we'll have clarity for the superintendent and close the loop on that.
Is there anyone that has a problem with that? Does anyone need a motion to have that happen, or?
Well, we're still following our current monitoring schedule, correct? We're not?
No, we will postpone ends 3 in order to pick up and complete ends 1 and 2.
Okay. That would require a motion then, because we have a set schedule.
That's
right
correct.
now.
That's correct. Is there such a motion?
I so move.
It's been moved and
Second.
seconded to spend the work study next week on completing the work of ends 1 and ends 2 and postpone ends 3 to a later date. I guess who wants to do the motion?
It's been moved and seconded.
Oh, you've been moved and seconded, right, okay. Okay, discussion.
I guess my concern is for the effectiveness and the efficiency of our board right now, of where it just feels like if this is, I don't know if one more meeting is gonna solve that issue of just how we go about this, and I feel like we're just going to be pushing everything back and just, I guess that's my concern, that there's much work to be done, and so for us to push this back, as we're moving into talking about, evaluation of the superintendent and his role, evaluation of the district and those kinds of things, these are issues that we've already pushed back in the fall, and I think to continue to push them back into not even seeing a calendar of what you're proposing as president, for us, how we're going to pick this back up and get back on course. I don't feel comfortable in voting for this just because it just seems, I don't see us solving something with it. If we need to, if there's a plan in place on how we're going to be able to get on top of ends 1, ends 2, and get caught up with what we're pushing back, then I guess I'm comfortable with that. But right now, I just feel like we're just
Well, and obviously, I'm not going to propose a plan.
yeah. So that's why I would wait for that kind of a plan before pursuing this vote.
So I guess, Director Peterson, I would ask you if we're not going to vote, because I have the concern too, but I also want us to take the time to look.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Right? So if we don't do this and we move forward with ends 3, now we have all 3 of them compiled in a month from now. And then we're in ends 4.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have a calendar tonight to look at. So do you have any other recommendations or thoughts around, as you said, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done around this.
Well, right now we've pushed to have all the material prior to the work studies. We have that first board meeting, and I look at the board's questioning a lot of times. I think our process in getting there is slow and it's late, and we're maybe needing to do the work sooner. And so that for me is adding one more day, one more meeting, pushing it back. I don't think we're solving anything. And so for me, I think we're better off continuing through the progress of this and picking back stuff up, maybe later on in the year reviewing it again, adding to this, getting a process in place. But right now, I don't see us solving anything by pushing it back one more meeting. I think that if we need to add if there's a plan in the work studies and how we break that down, or the types of questions or the type of feedback board members do offline, and giving feedback for discussion, then I think we need to look at that. But at this time, I think one more meeting pushing it back, I don't think solves anything. This is just my personal take.
Is ENS 3 slated for our next board work study?
Yes.
And it's an important ends as well. So
I think part of what my struggle is that we are a work in progress that never stops, and even though we have new board members, there's work that's continued and been going on, and it makes it very difficult to almost feel like you're stopping a process in the interest not of not informing, but of almost redoing, as opposed to how we can move forward with a sense of trust and then make some changes and move forward as a new board of 5 as we come through another cycle. All of us have entered this board in the middle of cycles, and while each of us has a different approach or a different belief about where we are and the work we should be doing, or what could have happened or should have happened, or where we should be or where we could be, we also have to trust the fact that as a board we have to continue our work. And so I find a difficult sometimes trying to figure out how to find a balance between the honor of the work that's happened previously and the honor of new board members coming in with a new perspective and a new look. And I think sometimes that's where we feel like we're not making a lot of forward momentum. And I don't know if there's a way that we can figure out how we find a midpoint of being able to do both of those things, because it just right now is feeling a little stuck.
Well, I think one of the things that I perceive is that we have not completed ENS 1 and ENS 2, and we're ready to move on. Now, if somebody can tell me that we're done and we've given direction to the administration on those 2, then I say move on. But I think what I'm hearing is that we have not given direction. We've taken 2 votes. We've supported one. One's in compliance, one isn't. Is that all we need to do? Is that the history of how this works?
I guess for me, it's how it's the role of the president to collect that data from the board, get the feedback, and how to put that together. Obviously, there was 3 no votes tonight. You would probably need to have a reason for why you voted no or yes, or if there's certain things you thought that yes were put in compliance. And my guess is every board member who has had this month to look that over should have a list of things that they either looked at that was either positive or negative. And then how do we collect that data? Compare it, or if it's just putting the 5 board members together, presenting that to the board and saying this was the collaborative together. I think that's what we're trying to attempt in the survey. But as Director Wilson noted, some of the board feedback has not been stellar in that. I saw 2 comments on that, and so like I said, I think it's how do we move that forward in getting feedback, and because that's what it's going to require. It's going to require not just a no, not in compliance, but no,
right,
or yes,
right,
and this is why.
That's correct, and that's what concerns me, is that we not leave it at yes or no.
So the job of the board, at least as I have come to understand it, is to clarify the vision. That's our job. And to move past ENS 1 and 2 without having done that means we're just brushing over the work. And so if I can add a suggestion, maybe we continue, as Director Peterson said, to stay on course, but put some time in this work study where board members can bring the suggestion on how they would like to see the vision clearer, and we can have board discussion about that where we can bounce off whatever those ideas are and hear from the superintendent as to why we shouldn't add those particular pieces.
So my concern with that is that was the proposal that we did when we went to ENS 2. And ENS 1 got pushed completely, brushed over, because we had so much to cover in that 3-hour window that we did with ENS 2 and the ELs that we did. So for us to say we're going to add something next week to an already a packed schedule, I just am concerned that we're going to do the same thing again and just brush over them. So I don't know what the right answer is.
I think we can do it in such a way that we won't rush over it. I think we have to do this in order to move forward. And so I am not comfortable with, as a president, collecting information and creating my own and sending it out. I think it's a board decision that we've got to make as to the direction that we're giving or the clarification that we're giving. So I would recommend, unless there's disagreement, that we try to do both at the next meeting, and understand it may be a little longer meeting, but we address the question of ends 1 and ends 2 and any clarifying and direction we want to give, and we move to ends 3. Is there concern with that?
And Madam President, I would suggest that in that meeting, we look at our policy governance schedule, and any modifications that need to be made for time's sake, we make them at that point in time. We're not prepared to change the calendar tonight, but we could be at that meeting on Tuesday.
Yeah. Okay, are we in agreement?
Yeah, so are we going to be voting no? Are we going to be voting on this motion then that's on the floor right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
got it. So, yeah, great.
Okay, so the motion is, I can't even remember totally what did we have a motion on postponing?
We did. Move to spend the work study next week on completing the works of ends 1 and 2 and ends 3 to a later date. That's what your motion was.
Okay, so
I
that's
don't know
what,
who seconded
that's
it.
what we need.
Somebody wants to tell me.
That was it.
Who seconded that?
Tony seconded it. Claire
Okay.
motion and Tony seconded.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to postpone ends 3 from next week's work study. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no?
Nay.
No. No. Okay, motion fails. Now, do we need another motion? Or do you need a motion to be comfortable with moving forward with ends 1, ends 2 clarification, and moving on to ends 3? Okay, and that's what we'll do at the work study. So, I lost the agenda. There it is. Okay, Executive Limitations 13, Academic Program. Is there a motion?
Madam President, I move that the board vote that this executive limitation, the academic program standards and practices be found in compliance.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Moving on to Executive Limitation 16.
Madam President, I move that Executive Limitation 16 Academic Program, Advanced Program is in compliance.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Discussion? Seeing none?
Madam President, excuse me.
Yes.
My only concern about this EL, this EL had a component in it that that I missed the discussion on about culturally relevant academic material being presented so that all kids would have an opportunity to learn. And I didn't have a chance to hear what that is, but I would love to get that information at a later date.
Okay. You need it before we vote?
No, I don't need it before we vote. The rest of it is.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Okay. Seeing nothing further unless someone has something to add, we are adjourned. Oh, thanks.
Mr. Moore, how are you, sir? Councilman?